Warbreaker is the story of two sisters who happen to be princesses, the God King one of them has to marry, the lesser god who doesn't like his job, and the immortal who's still trying to undo the mistakes he made hundreds of years ago. Their world is one in which those who die in glory return as gods to live confined in a pantheon in Hallandren's capital city, and where a power known as biochromatic magic is based on an essence known as breath that can only be collected one unit at a time from individual people. By using breath and drawing upon the color in everyday objects, all manner of miracles and mischief can be accomplished. It will take considerable quantities of each to resolve all the challenges facing Vivenna and Ciri, princesses of Idris, Susabran, the God King, Lightsong, reluctant god of bravery, and mysterious Vasher, the Warbreaker. So if you found that interesting, just keep watching. What up, nerds? Welcome back to the Nerdy Narrative. My name is Leslie Smith, and I am very excited about today's book chat, which is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. After a month waiting on this book to be delivered, I finally got it. And I just recently finished it, and I absolutely adored this book. So a day or so after I finished reading Warbreaker, Michael Nip posted his review, which I'll put up here in the cards, and I saw someone say that there is going to be another book or two of this world by Brandon Sanderson, and I am stoked. I could not be happier. That's fantastic news. The best starting point I can think of is a quote from the book. Every man is a hero of his own story. The reason why that is so important is because so many characters in this book rely on their own personal judgment based off where they stand in their own lives, what they consider to be right and wrong, and the journey of how events in this book change them. So let's expound on that. Warbreaker is a slow-paced novel about the story of two sisters who happen to be princesses of Idris. They're not the only two children of the King of Idris, however. There is a third sister who became a monk, and then a son who is going to be the heir. The story opens, Idris and Hallandren are yet again on the brink of war. Strategically, the King of Idris knows it's just not a good time for Idris to go to war. The soldiers have been dealing with other uprisings in the outlying areas around Idris. They're tired. They need time to rest and recover. He decides the best thing for him to do is honor an agreement that he made with Hallandren 20 years prior, and that is to send his eldest daughter Vivenna to marry the God King and produce a royal heir. The reason why this is so important is because the royal family in Idris happens to be the original royal family in Hallandren. They just fled because they did not agree with the beliefs and people known as the Returned in Hallandren. Returned are people who died in a noble or brave way, so they were returned to life. In being returned to life, they're considered gods by the people of Hallandren and are treated as such. The God King of the Return is who rules in Hallandren. So by marrying Vivenna to the God King and producing a royal heir, it's going to be seen as uniting the two, so hopefully they won't go to war. When it comes time to send Vivenna, however, the King of Idris changes his mind. He is being the hero of his own story. He is using his judgment where he stands in that moment, and in that moment he cannot bear to lose Vivenna. She is clearly his favorite child. He rationalizes with himself that if war did break out, it would be better for her to be in Idris and be his heir than to be possibly sent to Hallandren and killed as soon as she produces a child. So he decides he can live without his youngest daughter, Ciri, who never took anything seriously. She was always skipping out on her studies, disappearing, doing things she shouldn't be doing. He decides to send her. Well, Vivenna, being the hero of her own story, can't stand being unimportant. she had trained all of her life to go and be the God King's wife, she rationalizes to herself that she needs to go and save Ciri. She's been trained all about Hallandren. That's what she's going to do. So she sets off to Hallandren to rescue Ciri. As a result of her selfish intent, she is put through the ringer her character development. While a lot of people don't enjoy Vivenna's point of view, she suffered the most, in my opinion. She had the best outcome because she went from being a selfish princess to being a girl who shed all of that to go and do good. It wasn't easy for her. It wasn't just, she doesn't just have some realization where the story turns for her. No, she really got put through it. But Vivenna does not rescue Ciri before she's married to the God King. And the relationship between Ciri and Susebron, the God King, probably my favorite. It is so sweet and heartwarming, and the fact that Ciri actually was the most perfect choice of daughter to send to the God King. So you have that going on with the two sisters. You have one sister who is now the queen of the enemy. The other sister who supposedly was going to rescue the first one and is now starting a rebellion against the God King and the Returned. But you also have Lightsong, who is a returned god. I fell in love with Lightsong immediately. Lightsong questioned everything about what was going on. Like, he was being worshipped as a god. He never felt like one. When you are returned, when you die and you are returned, you don't carry your memories forward of who you were in your first life. But he's kind of getting some feelings. He does some things that kind of elude him to think of who he might be. And he really wants to know who he was. I really wanted to know who he was. His part that he plays in this story is just amazing. And then besides Lightsong, you have Vasher, who is a mystery. It was basically the end before I knew whether or not he was good or evil. And he had this sword called Nightblood, who was sentient. He would talk to you. And oh man, Nightblood was so hilarious. But he didn't have the knowledge of feelings. But he would pick up on things from Vasher and would learn. But he would think he would know how he would feel about something, but he's really just making observations, and they were just so hilarious. He was all the time trying to read a situation, and it was usually very wrong, but it was so comical. The second book is rumored to be titled Nightblood, so I am really excited to get more on the story of how Nightblood was created and came to be. Warbreaker is just a fantastic story of political intrigue and maneuvering, and I never figured out who was pulling the strings until it was literally spelled out for me in writing. It was just so masterfully done. I suspected everybody at some point. It was so different. It was so interesting because, like I said, that quote, "Every man is a hero of his own story," it just really struck me because every character starts out believing what they were raised to believe, what they were taught, and stood in judgment of those that did not agree with them. But as they experienced things outside of what they were taught, how that changed them, how that developed them as a character, it was fascinating. Like an example, Ciri and Vivenna were taught that awakening, magic, color was bad. And the magic system in Warbreaker is based on using your breath. And every individual has one breath. And you can actually gain more breaths from other individuals. And they did that by, you could sell your breath for money. And so therefore you could buy breaths. So people could buy breaths. When someone died, they could choose to give their breath to someone else. That breath, you could speak a command and remove the breath from your body and put it in an object like a rope. Something that had been alive before, like made from something that had lived before. And say, hold things. And you could throw it at a person and it would maybe and it would tie them up. And then once you were done with it, you could retrieve your breath from that object. And that was called awakening. Another key piece of that is you had to have something from color. So when you would speak the command to the rope, you would have like maybe a colored handkerchief in your hand. It would bleed and it would just remove all of the color out of that handkerchief and turn it gray. And so that was how magic worked. If a person gave up their one breath, they became what was known as a drab. And they were just like dull colored and things of that nature. You know, they were just very dull. And the more breaths that you had, the different levels of heightening you could achieve, and to where you could tell when someone was approaching you that was alive. You could differentiate between all of the different colors to a level that just doesn't exist to the naked eye. So it was so fascinating. And in the beginning, Vivenna and Ciri were from Idris, where nobody wore anything of color. They did not allow any awakeners where they lived. And here they are, both thrown into a city where everything is about color. Everything is colorful. Awakeners everywhere. Everyone seemed to have multitudes of breaths. How they changed. Vivenna stood in total judgment until she was thrown into a life and death situation, saving her people, where she received breaths and learned how to use them and speak the commands and awaken things, and how that changed her and made her feel. And by the end, she had a completely different opinion. The important thing that I took away from that is she never stopped judging people. She tried, but she couldn't. You know, she's like, I need to quit judging people. It's wrong. She never stopped, but she did form judgments, but she learned to try to understand them, why people did things the way they did. And so that's why I felt her character development was so important. I just loved it. This book was amazing. So many fantastic messages. I loved it. 5 stars. Can't wait to read it again. I'm so looking forward. The next book, I know it's probably going to be a while, because I'm sure Brandon Sanderson's going to be busy with Mistborn being made into a TV adaptation, but your girl can hope. There you have it. Those are my thoughts about WARBREAKER. I'm sure I'm going to have more. Even though I finished the book and giving you my initial thoughts, I'm sure I'm going to think of more as I go. So please join me in the comments below. Tell me if you've read it, what you thought about it, what your takeaway was, so we can continue the discussion. Just because I know what the last page said doesn't mean it's over. I hope you enjoyed our chat today. If you did, don't forget to help me out by subscribing and giving me a thumbs up below. Have a fantastic rest of your day. I'll see you soon.